Hey guys, Miss Riggs here. Today we're going to talk about functions and control of the endocrine system. So we're starting a new unit on the endocrine system. And so I just want to basically go over what the endocrine system regulates. So the endocrine system really regulates hormones in the body. And the endocrine system and the nervous system kind of work together in order to react to different stimuli in order to maintain homeostasis. So as we go through, we're going to talk about these functions of the endocrine system. So let's first broadly brush through the anatomy of the endocrine system. So it's a collection of organs and small glands that directly or indirectly influence all of the functions of the body. So these glands are either they're going to excrete hormones, or they're going to excrete waste or other bodily fluids outside of the system or to other organs. So as I said earlier, there is an overlap between the endocrine system and the nervous system, and we'll talk more about that as we go through this unit. But basically, they work together in order to establish and maintain homeostasis. So there's two different types of glands. There's endocrine glands and there's exocrine glands. We know that endo means inside. So endocrine glands are glands that secrete things inside of the body. They secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream. So hormones go through the bloodstream and they basically hit every structure in the body, but only certain things need those hormones and receive those hormones. So these include the hypothalamus, pancreas, pituitary gland, adrenal gland, thyroid gland, pineal gland, testes, and ovaries. These are all endocrine glands. Organs and glands spread throughout the body and regulate many functions. So you find all of these glands throughout the body. Some are in the brain. Some are in the reproductive system. Some are in the internal structures of the body. They're all over the body, and they're going to send messages to each other. So the exocrine glands, exo, outside, these excrete externally. So unlike the endocrine glands, which secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream, exocrine glands have a duct through which secretions are carried to the body's surface or other organs. So it's important to note endocrine glands do not have ducts in general. Exocrine glands do have ducts. So exocrine glands are going to include sweat glands, salivary glands, which are in your saliva, mammary glands, which are in the breast, lacrimal glands, and pancreas glands. So the pancreas is a really important organ, and it serves some really important functions throughout the endocrine system. So the pancreas is both an exocrine and endocrine gland. It does contain ducts, so it releases hormones that regulate blood glucose levels in the body. It secretes digestive enzymes through a duct into the small intestine as well. So a really important organ when it comes to regulation of hormones. So what are hormones? Hormones are chemical messengers that influence the activity of other tissues and organs. So they are basically chemicals that are secreted from these glands, and they basically send messages throughout the body to tell the body what to do. The most important thing that the hormones do, or the biggest reason that we have hormones, is to regulate homeostasis. So we're going to make sure that the body maintains certain homeostatic functions, but we're also going to maintain reproductive organs and reproductive functions as well. So hormones regulate carbohydrate, fat, and protein metabolism, water and electrolyte balance, reproductive activity, growth and development, and energy balance. They also aid in the body's response to infection and stress. So the different reactions on our bodies secrete different types of hormones, and we'll talk more about that, but they're going to be classified into two types. So a steroid hormone is basically a lipid or fat hormone, and these are secreted by the adrenal cortex or the reproductive glands. Amino acid hormones are much more abundant, and they are composed of proteins. So they make up the majority of all of the hormones in our body. So hormones need something to collect them. We know that they go throughout the bloodstream, and they basically touch every part of the body, but not all of the body is affected by these hormones. So how do they know what part of the body takes in these hormones and what parts don't? Well, we have these hormone receptors. And so hormones travel throughout the body, but only affect the tissue and organs that have receptors specific to this particular hormone. So you can see here a steroid hormone, and we have a steroid receptor, and it kind of fits like a puzzle piece, and then that receptor is going to take it in to where it needs to go, bind to the DNA, create mRNA in order to transmit these signals and manipulate the DNA. So the hormone binds with the receptor and then influences the activity of the cell. So it's only certain cells that need to have this function from these certain hormones. So other cells are the hormone's just gonna bypass them. So receptors for steroid hormones are found inside the nucleus. So they are already inside the nucleus, while the receptors for amino acid are going to be out in the plasma membrane outside, the covering around the cell. So some hormones have more receptors than others, and that widens their effects. So some hormones are regulated kind of throughout the body, where others are more specifically located. So how do our hormone balances change? So this has to do with upregulating and downregulating of our hormone receptors, and this can be manipulated by our actions in our environment. So activity of hormone receptors can be up or downregulated. So if they're upregulated, that means they increase, and it makes it more sensitive, your body more sensitive to these hormones. Exercise is a good example of upregulation, and this increases the insulin receptors. So they're more sensitive to insulin, so our body doesn't need to produce as much insulin as somebody who doesn't exercise. So the downside of this is downregulation increases as obesity increases. So downregulation decreases, making them less sensitive to hormones. And this is why we see a lot of type 2 diabetes and obesity, because we're having to create so much insulin in the body that it just kind of shuts down that system. So that's how obesity really correlates with type 2 diabetes. So hormone secretion control. Endocrine glands regulate in three different ways. We already talked about how the endocrine system is correlated with the nervous system. So we have neural control. That's our brain sending messages in order to regulate these hormone secretions. We also have hormonal control. So other hormones can kind of control how much a hormone is secreted. And then humoral control is going to basically regulate the secretion based off of homeostatic levels of different systems. So let's talk about each of these more in depth. So neural control, as it says, is basically controlled by stimuli in the nervous system. So say we see a bear and our nervous system sends a signal out saying that we need to either fight or flight. So these nerve fibers are going to stimulate the endocrine organs to release these hormones. So our hormones tell the rest of our body what we need to do. So an example is fight or flight response. The nervous system sends messages to stimulate the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine and norepinephrine hormones that prove the body to fight or flee from a stressful situation. So what does that mean? So basically it's going to send signals throughout the body and change our body composition. So it's going to increase our heart rate. It's going to increase our blood pressure, our breathing. Our blood flow to our muscles is going to change. It's going to decrease blood flow to organs and dilate the pupil. So these are all important functions of fight or flight. And this isn't just us. Obviously, other animals and other organisms also have a fight or flight response. So hormonal control. Endocrine organs are stimulated by hormones from other endocrine organs. So we have hormones that are sent out, and then they stimulate another hormonal response. So it's kind of like a domino effect. And this starts with the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is like the president of the endocrine system, and it's going to regulate the pituitary gland and the adrenal cortex, which the pituitary gland then regulates the adrenal cortex, thyroid, reproductive organs, pancreas, and adrenal medulla. So it's kind of like a domino effect. It sends messages here, and then this relays those messages out to the other parts of the endocrine system. So this is all a negative feedback loop. So remember, we talked about a negative feedback loop in past lessons. Let's just reiterate what that means. So remember, we talked about a thermostat and how as the temperature goes down, it's going to trigger the thermostat to turn on to bring the temperature back to where it needs to be. And so this is how our body maintains homeostasis. So temperature is just one example, but it's an important example. And so the hypothalamus is going to send out these signals based off of stimuli that it's receiving. And so it's going to take its other army, basically the adrenal cortex, the thyroid, the reproductive organs, pancreas, and adrenal medulla, to create different responses to different stimuli based on the hormones that are excreted. So these are all a negative feedback loop. It needs a signal telling it to bring that function back down or bring that function back up. So humoral control, this is achieved by monitoring the levels of various substances in body fluids, such as the blood. So it's going to make sure that we have the right homeostatic levels of different hormones within our blood. So if homeostatic imbalance is detected, then it's corrected with the help of these humoral controls. And it's all based around maintaining homeostasis. And this, again, is another negative feedback. So what is homeostasis? We've talked about homeostasis lots of times in this class. But neural, hormonal, or humoral controls trigger the release of hormones during homeostatic imbalance. So what does that mean? So if something has a homeostatic imbalance, then it is not at the right levels to maintain a healthy body, let's say. So it's going to either bring those levels up or take those levels down in order to maintain homeostasis. And it can do these through releasing more hormones. Some of these hormones might give your body a reaction response. So if your temperature is cooling down, then these hormones will secrete messages to tell your body that it needs to shiver in order to bring that temperature up. So it can be physical or it can be other hormonal responses. So the hypothalamus, this is similar to our home furnace as we were talking about earlier, and it's going to regulate the temperature in our body. The hypothalamus releases hormones that act on the thyroid gland, and the thyroid gland produces hormones that set off other organs and glands to regulate temperature. So again, it's going to send out these messages to tell the rest of the body what it needs to do in order to regulate the temperature. All right, so that is it. That is our lesson for today. So remember, you can rewind and rewatch certain parts, you can come back at any point and watch this video over again. And let me know if you have any questions in class.